Well, the president today is facing new accusations of being a political divider for this country. Congressman Paul Ryan ramping up his criticism, saying that the president's, quote, party dividing strategy is hurting the country. And he said this in a radio interview. The Wisconsin congressman said this, quote, we're getting basically a strategy to divide people, to speak to people as if they're stuck in some class. They're stuck in some situation in their life, and the government's role is to help them cope with that. This is so inherently contrary to what we are about in this country. David Webb, host of The David Webb Show and co-founder of the Tea Party 365, and John Rowley is a Democratic strategist. Gentlemen, good to have you here today. You know, it's interesting. We read through the transcript of this radio interview this morning, and, you know, Paul Ryan's coming out fighting about the president's stance on all of this, David.
Well, he's speaking the truth, Martha. As of about a month ago, we effectively saw the end of governance by President Obama and what I call the class warfare re-election strategy. And Paul Ryan's absolutely right. America relies and has grown on rugged individualism, where we have the opportunity and, given the right moves, the ability to become the next Steve Jobs or successful businessman or whatever you want to be in life. But this is about telling you where you need to be and getting reelected. You know, when you talk about the president's jobs/stimulus plan, there's nothing in there that's intended to pass. We've seen the failure of the prior stimulus, so now son of stimulus is designed to say Republicans are blocking, but it failed in a Democrat Senate. So this is no longer about really reaching out and governing.
John, what's your reaction to the first thing that Paul Ryan said there? And then we're going to look a little bit more of it.
Well, when Paul Ryan starts throwing things out like class warfare, I mean, those are the sort of accusations and name-calling that happens when you're starting to sink and lose traction. So when things are going well for a party and for a candidate, they're not saying things like that. And I think Paul Ryan and a lot of the Republican presidential candidates are really starting to have a credibility problem. You can't just keep saying anything and everything and these wilder and wilder accusations. They're throwing so many roundhouse rights, they're going to knock themselves out.
He's being pretty specific, John. You know, let's take a look at the other part of what Paul Ryan said, and then we can go back to your suggestion that it's, you know, just sort of a sinking ship defense here. It says, it sounds like we're just taxing Brett Favre and Brad Pitt, you know, the millionaires and billionaires, a movie star and a baseball player. But what we're actually doing is a great damage to the entrepreneurial engine of this economy and the small businesses of this economy, where a vast majority of jobs come from. And because most of our businesses file their taxes that way, it's a huge economic mistake. So what he's really saying, and let me stay here with John for a moment on this, he's talking about this sort of image that has been clearly created by the president. And I don't think even the president wouldn't argue with this, because he goes out all the time and basically says, look, the folks at the upper end of the spectrum ought to pay a little bit more. But it turns out that those folks are not just Brad Pitt and Brett Favre, as Paul Ryan is trying to assert here. In fact, they are in many cases the small businesses that are the engine of the economy.
Well, I've got Warren Buffett's number, and I'd like to get it to Paul Ryan and a few others. I mean, he's on the other end of the spectrum, and if you're talking about one of the greatest capitalists of all time,
but the point is that we're not talking about the Warren Buffetts of the world. The point is that we're not talking about the Warren Buffetts and the Brad Pitts. You know, there are a lot of people in this country who fall into that category, and many of them fall into the category of being over $1 million because they own small businesses and they run small businesses.
Well, you know, 20% of the people in this country, Martha, carry 80% of the tax burden, roughly, in those numbers. You cannot support 300 million people with 20% of the population. By the way, Warren Buffett was talking about the hedge funds. That was the area the president took it too far and ran with it in an attempt to make a political point. But let's look at this president by the numbers. $4 trillion spent since his presidency, and that's actually borrowed, 43% of it roughly. $5 trillion spent in the Pelosi Congress. Big spending is not going to get us out of this economic problem. We have to have an environment that fosters growth, manufacturing, wealth creation, not a redistribution of wealth from one sector of the population to the other. And if you took the wealth of every person in that top percent in America and you added it up, you could run the federal government for about 4 months, and then you'd be out of money.
Yeah.
It's not a solution. Look at Greece. Look at failed austerity. What we need is self-imposed austerity and the class warfare. Let me tell you something. This is a President Pelosi who recognized Occupy Wall Street when they didn't see millions of Americans on their front lawn all across this country. Why? Politics of distraction. He speaks every 2 days on jobs, goes to a new state about every 6 days, and we're not talking about the economy and jobs. We're talking about Occupy Wall Street, and frankly, that's where we are.
We're going to have to leave it there. John, thank you very much for being here. David Webb, thanks as always.